Hey guys, Alan here and welcome to the very first episode of Tuesday TrackWalks. And in today's video, we're going to talk about why sim racing can never replicate real life racing. Now, sim racing has become a bit of a hot topic in recent years, especially with the pandemic, when everyone's been stuck in their houses, and more people are starting to gain their eyes on this particular subject. And with programming and technology getting more advanced than ever, more resources and attention are being put into sim racing, and whether that's real drivers participating in massive sim racing events or top sim racing drivers actually getting their chances of racing in real life. So it's quite obvious that this is going to some places and maybe even replacing the real thing. While it does replicate some aspects of the real thing, there's always some limitations, and today we're going to look into what set them apart and why I personally think that sim racing can never fully replicate the real thing. Now firstly, before we get into anything, we need to understand the fundamentals on both. While in real life racing, we're running it based off our understanding on physics, sim racing is running on a program that is written based off the data and our very own understanding on physics itself. So already we're seeing some kind of a pattern here. Sim racing is inevitably going to play sort of a catch up to what we have established on real life racing. So unlike real life racing, sim racing is always limited within the window of our power of programming. Secondly, it's the physics and the overall feel of the car that you receive as a driver. Now I know that there's tons of options to optimize your sim brake and your feeling on the car, like a direct drive wheel, motion sim brake, or some motion sim brake actually even have a G-force simulations, and etc. But as an owner of a direct drive wheel and a motion brake myself, I would say that it just doesn't do enough in terms of giving you the feel of the car. Yes, it's providing you with more feeling and more feedback, but at times it just doesn't convince me as a driver, and I feel like it's more of a distraction than anything in any sense. And it's especially prevalent when you try something as direct as like a kart, for example. I personally have been working on my very own motion sim rig software for the last 3 years or so, and no matter how much effort I put into it, whether it's just trying to fine tune it while driving it just to make it feel better, or studying about the whole software adjustment online, or getting supervision from technicians who have clearly a better idea on the software than I do, and while it is getting better, it just doesn't do enough. There's always a very decent gap between the motion sim rig that I have to the real thing, and like I said, it's especially prevalent in car, probably because this is something that I personally have the most experience in. So you can tell here, even with the best gears available on the sim racing market, I couldn't yield the result that I was initially anticipating when I started this project. Like I said, there's still a decent gap between the real thing and the sim rig that I have, despite all the effort I put into trying to maximize and fine-tune the whole thing. So you can imagine, for the majority of the people out there who often has a limited budget on their spendings on their gear, it's going to be even harder to try to replicate that experience that you get in a real car. And the reason being, it's just not possible to replicate the entire information, sensors and feedback you get from the car with just a few actuators and motors only to simulate a few axles of the entire motion of the car. While those axles are fundamentals and they do cover a hell lot of ground for the basic motions of the car, like body rolls, the way that you brake and accelerate, it's only that. And for a car's entire motion, there's a lot more than just going to that. Anything that works outside of the concept of those axles, it's not going to be possible to replicate it by these motion sim rigs. Examples like body twist, and the tire twist, the interaction between the tires, the track and the car, anything that requires a hell of a lot of information to be working on, it's not going to be possible to replicate on the regular sim rig. And it's the very same reason why that you see in a lot of simulators, it's actually very limited in terms of the weather options and the track condition options, because there's just way too much factor to process. And the fact is, no matter how much you may optimize those axles, it's never going to replicate the real thing when you're stuck in the concept of axles, because the real thing is more than just the concept of axles. It's a bit like trying to think about 4D world when you're living in 3D. Yes, you can visualize it based off your knowledge coming from 2D to 3D, but it's always going to be visualized in 3D. So for me, the difference between sim racing and real racing, it's almost a bit like switching onto controllers after driving on the wheel for some time. Yes, fundamentally they're the same, and the way that you should be controlling the car, the way that you get around the track quickly is still the same. They base off the same theory, and you can still get some kind of feedback from controller vibration or just visually seeing the car on your screen, but they become completely different experiences, even though fundamentally they are the same. And perhaps the most obvious difference out of them all is the physical demands. If you have ever tried rental car, track days, or maybe you even racing driver yourself in real life, you know that real life racing is actually very physical demanding, even for the people who exercise on a regular basis. There's actually a funny story that's been floating around my home track for a bit of time, is that there was once a Hong Kong fitness champion coming to a rental 100cc kart, which are basically KT100s with a bit of buster chassis. He drove for 5 laps before he ended up in the tyre wall, and the reason being he was so out of string that he couldn't hold the car in the corners, thus in the barrier he goes. Now this story is obviously just for entertainment, but it also gives us a pretty good idea on just how physically demanding racing is. And it's not like the fitness champion was a slouch either. He goes to regular gym sessions and definitely classifies as someone who exercises regularly. So if he was having problems, you can see why you're feeling busted after a full day of racing. The strength required on the steering and braking, the constant feedback being sent from the car to the seat to your body, and the strength that you needed to hold yourself remotely seated when you're going against corners and G-forces, and not to mention the amount of focus that you needed in the car in order to keep the car on control. Which is why you see real racing drivers take regular fitness training in order to stay on top of their game, while this is not nearly as prevalent in sim racing. So after all that, what am I trying to say here? Well, the point that I'm trying to make here is that real life racing and sim racing are two different things and should be taken separately, as there's just so many differences between the two of them. Obviously, as a sim racer and a real life racer myself, I have no intention to watch down or praise any of the two, but I think not approaching them as one of the same and therefore having a different mindset when you go into the two of them is something that should be kept in mind. I know for myself, I'm guilty of making this mistake in the past, and if I would have done that, I wouldn't have caused as much progress that I could have made in both the territories. While I think that it is very beneficial to have a sim rig laying around as an alternative practice ground, it can actually be harmful to your craft if you're not taking it as what it is and ending up in the rabbit hole of immersion, as I would like to say. At the end of the day, it's a sim. It literally said in its name that it's supposed to be a simulation, so you shouldn't come to expect it will recreate the experience of that in real life. So go ahead and have fun on it, even if your gear isn't the best or your POV is somehow incorrect. As long as you're enjoying the experience while doing it, it doesn't really matter at the end of the day. But with technology and programming getting more advanced day by day, and with our understanding on the sport it's getting more and more established, who knows, we may actually get to see a sim that can eventually recreate the experience of that in real life. But who knows, we shall see. As ever, I'm Alvin Wong. Thank you very much for watching. Please subscribe, hit the bell icon if you haven't already, and I shall see you in the next episode of Tuesday TrackWalks. Cheers guys, take care, and I shall see you soon.